or as far as I know, it's working. So, but a few weeks ago, I was contacted by a reporter from the Trib, and she was interested in doing a story about this 250. Let me scroll up here. We have on our website a Trafford Map Project, the Westmoreland 250. Oh, is that working? Okay, good. Thanks, Randy. So we've been working on it, particularly Steve and Tom Kelly, trying to identify the 250 oldest buildings in Trafford. And we came up with the idea, really it was Tom's idea. We were thinking, I was at a meeting for Westmoreland Historical Society. It's a partnership that we have with a lot of historical societies in the area. And they said, let's try to work on the 250 and see what we can come up with. So we kicked a couple things around, and it was Tom's idea. Can we identify the 250 oldest buildings in Trafford? So that's what this presentation is about. But it's also digging into a little bit of history and things that we uncover as we look into the background of these houses and in buildings. And there's an interesting story that it's still an unknown story that we talked about last time, Randy. In fact, your name was on a document that is attached to this person, so I'll have to, not your name, but your family name. So I'll get into this. Anything that I show you tonight, you can access it pretty much from your own computer. And looking at this map, I recommend using a laptop or a desktop versus a phone. It's just a better quality. And sometimes I've noticed on the phone, you can't do as many features unless I'm just old and not looking at it right. But where you're going to start is at the traffordhistory.org. And I have a little link here that says map here. Before I get into that, let me just back up and just tell you, let's do it this way. Let me show you what it looks like first. Hi there. It's a little bit of a slow connection inside the building here. This is what you will see when you open up the map. And on the left-hand column, there is a legend, and you can deselect each one of these. And I'm going to start down the bottom. I'm not going to go through every 250. We'll be here till 11, right? Let me start deselecting some of these. And you can see as I deselect these items, the pins start to disappear from the map. And this is how we started to count. And when you're talking about 250 years of Westmoreland County, Trafford entered into the picture in 1904, but our history goes back to the very early parts of, obviously, Westmoreland County. And that's where I want to start with. And where we're starting with really is, find right in this area, which is, if you can see that, is Capetsville. And let me show you. Okay, on display at the Westmoreland Historical Society out in Hannistown, they have a display. It's called Westmoreland 250, telling our story with 250 objects. Again, just playing off that 250. So they picked 25 objects. We have a number of photographs in that display from Trafford. But the one thing I suggested, they were looking for ideas. Do you, as a historical society, have anything that might represent something in Trafford or Westmoreland County's 250 years? And I immediately thought I have my dad here. Vic, you're going to raise your hand. This is on display. Is his dad built a still and was actually hidden in his house for many years, and we didn't know about it. He didn't know about it, and that's a big part of, quite honestly, of county history. Is it wasn't to sell, it was personal consumption, particularly during Prohibition, and it was just part of everyday life. And part of, so that's on display proudly at the Historical Society. Since we're counting 250 oldest homes, this article appeared in the Pittsburgh Post in 1906, about 2 years after Trafford was founded. And I pointed out because only 2 years later, they had 225 frame houses, 95 brick houses, 23 business houses, whatever that is, a hotel with 98 rooms, and that was the big hotel, which we used to remember or call the bank building, but it was a hotel first. If I go back 100 years before this time, this article was in the Pittsburgh Weekly Gazette, 1806, and this is really the beginning time frame of a business for John Capet. Capet was running a mill right on Brush Creek, where today, if you're familiar with where Jack's Roofing used to be, does that ring a bell for most people here? Jack's Roofing, heading down off of 993, if you were to go through Mahaffey Hill, there at the base of that hill, that's essentially where there was a mill. And John Capet would go to Pittsburgh, pick up your wool or your, bring it back to this area, what we call Capetsville now. And a fulling mill was, and there's a whole story behind the fulling mill, but it's basically pressing down the wool into a blanket type. These are the early maps. So everyone's familiar with where the railroad is. It's easier if I get money. So Capetsville, there's a mill, and you'll notice where it says DS Brush. I don't know if Brush, it'll be something to look into, but Brush named after, or Brush Creek named after the Brush family. I don't know. But Daniel Brush married Susan Mahaffey. So you're familiar with the Mahaffey Hill. They owned the property in that area. And I want you to remember this later on, this name here, Henry Berlin. This also goes by Harrison Berlin. He married their daughter. And I just want you in the back of your mind, remember that name Berlin, because we're going to come back to it. So the reason I mention that is in this area, this is Wallace Avenue at the top. This is Shady Lane. There used to be a bridge that crossed there, and where Jack's Roofing would have been right in this area, and that's where, this is all the Brush property. That's where I think currently there's one of the oldest buildings still in Trafford. I'm fortunate because my family, on my mom's side, were early settlers in that area. And I have a number of photos that have been handed down because the old house is still there. My aunt still lives in the house, and she shared a lot of these photos with me. This is an example of, that's my great-grandmother, and then that's my great-great-grandmother, great-great-grandfather. So it's nice to be able to have these old photos. And the reason I mention that is I've been able to trace back this family back to Germany, but the Blends were the ones, early settlers in that area. And Catherine Lowe, who was Catherine Blend, had a sister, Margaret Lowe, and married a Carl Seidel. The Seidels bought the property from Daniel and Susan Brush. So it passed down from Brush to Seidel, and then on to my great-grandmother, Bigler. And this is Roy Bigler, my grandmother, and my mom, down in that area. But here's the funny part that I think is interesting about that property. There's a house down there which I think, I've been told, again through family stories, the Jack's Roofing is an old house, and I've been told if you peel off the siding off of there is a log house under there. And interestingly enough, this is on the deed for one in the county records. it's funny that they say known as the old Bigler property. Today, you would say that and say, who are you talking about? But I know who they're talking about. And then it says, they mentioned that erected there on a log house. That bridge that we were talking about, this is my grandmother's brother, Roy Bigler, crossing, going down this road here is Wallace Avenue. Hey, John. This is Shady Lane over here. And I mention these because there's a lot of clues that you find in some of these old photos. This is on the other side, this is on the side closest to the Brush property. This is Roy and his sister Betty, which was my grandmother's siblings. And you can tell from where they're standing that this is the cable holding up that bridge. But what I'm looking at in the background is this house which is not there anymore. That would have been on the Brush property. And here are the Seidels who bought the property from the Brush family. And there's this house in the background, and I colored it just using a little program online. I can't tell if that's the creek or not, but that's likely the house that's sitting on that property. So it's great to be able to sort through family photos and start to connect the pieces to what you're looking at. And these, again, this is, the bridge is no longer there. It's my understanding they're considering putting one in there. It's in talk, but it would be very expensive, right? But how else? There's only one access to South Trafford. So one of those houses is likely one of the oldest houses in Trafford. So let's go back over to that map, and I want to show you what we're looking at. It's a slow connection. Okay, so we're down in Capetsville, and I have this marked here as one of the oldest. And when you click on that little photo, it'll click up. You can click on a picture. It's a little bit slow, and I've tried to add some. These are the maps I told you that are available. So I'll let you look at those online. I want to do one thing. If I go down to this legend, I'm going to click on buildings that are gone, and you see how it pulls up some images there. I just added to this map. If you click on the image, it'll show you some things that are no longer there. And I threw those pictures on there so you had them. Next to, there's the Seidels. Now here's my one house that I've been trying to figure out where it's located. It's just difficult to place it, and that's the original Capet house. You've probably seen this picture in the 75th anniversary book, the original Capet. I put a story, and I'll mention online. The nice thing about this Google program is you can attach a link right here, and that link will take you to an article that was written about the property. And let's see if I have any other pictures of it. The reason I say it's tough to figure out exactly where it was is because the railroad came through and took out the house. And on these old maps, they list a few different properties. McQuaid, the J. Capets heirs, so it's most likely it's that house, or McQuaid. McQuaid his name was Capet McQuaid. He was the last one that he just was holding out. He didn't want to leave. And that's the story that I put on that article. It's almost like if you've seen the movie Up, that's the same concept, but he was forced to leave. And that's that story here. So we're going to leave the Capetsville area, and let me see. One thing I didn't mention any of the maps that I'm showing also, I want to show you how to get to them. Right on the Trafford website, it says map here. There's also a little link. It says behind the numbers. This is how we started to count where these coming from, and it gives you a link to all the tools that we use as well. So you can look at these as a resource. This one is, if you've ever been to this is probably one of the coolest tools that Westmoreland County has. This is all of Westmoreland County. If I zoom in on Trafford, let's get down to...
Andrew.
Yes.
Hi.
Oh, yes.
I just messaged Jackie Kapolchuk, Jack's daughter.
Yes, yes.
And she said, yes, when the house flooded, we had to tear out all the paneling. The living room is all old log cabin.
There you have it. That's it. Confirmed. Thank you. So you wonder when that was for being a log cabin, how old that is. I want to show you, and I'll pull up on this how we figured these out. So here is Ronnie's house, and these forget the lines, they're somewhat off, so don't take these verbatim, but this shows the property line, and when you click on it, it'll tell you who owns the property. And if you see there, it says a deed image link. This is what we use to, you can sort of go backwards in time to find out who owned the property before that person. You have to do a little research if it's a sheriff's sale or something to that effect, but that's the quickest way to find who owns a certain property on Westmoreland County. The other thing we had to do in our 250 is we had to not include some people, and I kind of felt bad, but it has to do with the South Trafford. And when we get into that area, this line represents Allegheny County and Westmoreland County. So they drew the line, and as far as I can tell, the reason that line was a Stewart. It was one of the Stewart's property versus another Stewart, and so so these houses are all in Allegheny County. Some of them are in Westmoreland County. All right, so let me jump back into. So the next settlement I'm going to go over to is the Stewarts. They would have been the next. So Stewart Station, you've got the building that's still there, built in the probably about 1852 is the station itself. Just an early photo of, and I added these photos. Oh, that's John, thanks. This is a picture which is a pretty nice picture of John Franklin Miller. We had a presentation a couple years ago. These photos were donated to us, and I colorized it just to try to get some things to pop out. But that behind that, the current building, it's still there. It's just now a business. But that was Stewart Station, eventually become Trafford Station. Across the, the oldest one I'm going to say is the original John Capet and Jane Stewart, which is on Westmoreland Road. Martha Jane Shaw, Robert Shaw. I put again another link. I want to make a comment here that just recently you may have seen a post on Nancy Woodall, who passed away. She was Nancy Piper, who was raised here, and the family reached out to us and just to get some information what her mom was sharing. And I have a story here about Nancy. If you click on it, it'll take you to the. This is Nancy in the backyard of that house. So I just mentioned that story. And if you remember, I mentioned the Berlins. So this is where, this is the David Duff Berlin house, and it's currently, there used to be a road, let's go over to Capetsville, across from the train station. Where are we at? Yeah, right here. Here's the train station here, and across the road is the Berlin house. There used to be 4 properties there. They were owned by the Berlins, sold several times, but here's one of the things that we talked about last meeting is some letters that were donated to us for copies, and it's just a little bit bizarre to read, but I'm going to read it anyway. And Randy knows what I'm talking about. Maybe I should show see if I can show the family first. For some reason it's not letting me go back and forth. Right here. John Oliver Blackburn used to be the tax collector in Trafford in 1908, 1909. And he wrote a letter to a Maud Berlin, and this is in 1908 is when it was dated. But John Oliver was married once, and his first wife died in 1890. And so we have these copies of this letter, and I'm just going to read it and see what you think. It says, Trafford City, PA, October 9th, 1908. Mrs. Maud Berlin, I want you to know that I found out some things. I want to tell you that the money you are building your fine houses in Trafford with is stained with blood, the blood of my poor, innocent, helpless wife and child. John O. Blackburn. And that's it. So then there's another one about a few months later, and he's writing to Harry Berlin, which I mentioned that earlier. He's writing, Dear Sir, I have found out a short time ago that my former wife Daisy and her child that died about 19 years ago, and he underlines, was murdered. And they were murdered by your present wife Maud and others in a letter I wrote to Alf Sheridan about 5 months ago. I openly accused him, and he's writing this with, he's the tax collector of Trafford, and he's using his return address as the tax collector too. And this is honestly, I'm saying this because I'm hoping somebody might hear this story and say, oh, I know it, this was passed on, because I can't find anything. It says, I openly accused him, his mother, his half-sister Maud, and Mammy of this horrible crime, which I have the details. I wrote to your wife about 2 months ago, telling her that the money she's building the fine houses in Trafford were stained with the blood of my poor, innocent, helpless wife and child. Why did she not, and you can't read it. And then he signs it, yours truly, J.O. Blackburn. Yeah. So, I just wanted to show you what, so Henry Berlin is married to Maud. Maud is actually of the same family as this Gamble. Simon Daum had in Elizabeth. So they would have been sisters, I suppose. The only thing I can think initially is, was she a midwife and something went wrong? And it just, there's too many variables, but hopefully just, I'm trying to find out if anyone has ever even heard this story. And the reason I bring it up is it's tracing the history of the property. And when you go back, Maud had her hand in a lot of stuff, and I can't figure out what's going on. And that's why, Randy, I mentioned to you, your family, there's a deed transfer, and they're mentioning the Petters in a deed transfer. It's either adjoining Maud's
In Trafford?
It says Level Green.
Level Green.
Yeah. Oh no, it says Ardera. So as I dig into it more, somebody will have to let me know if they've come across it. So just an interesting story about. I wish I could tell you the ending, but I just don't know it yet.
Everybody's looking in their attics for letters.
Yeah. All right, let me go back to this. So that's the early properties of the Stewart Station area, and then let me jump over to the third settlement that's really early before Trafford itself, and that is Blackburn. And there's one house that is probably the oldest in that area, the Henry Moffett house. And this house is still there. They added an addition off the front, and there's a little bit better picture where you'll be. This isn't coming up, is it? Let me close this. Does that ring a bell that when you look at that picture?
Yeah.
This is the Henry Moffett house. This, if you're looking at Shadow Woods, is in the background. The new ice cream store in Plaza would be over here. So you're on Forbes Road. This is a different angle. Up on the hill, there was the tennis courts. This wall, this corner of this wall was still there. Henry Moffat's house is right here. You can sort of see in this corner a silo. There's another house I'll mention. It's still there. And I tried to focus in on the Moffat house, but it's a little bit blurry. But that house is right here. If I click on, go back to the buildings that are no longer here, you see the purple ones that show up. This is the old mansion. John used to live there. Up on top of the hill. This is it was called the Tennis Association, Trafford's Tennis Association. This is the creek. The Moffat house would have been right down here below it. And then this is where the BY is. This, you see the way that track is, and we have a story about the BY on our website. Another building that's not there, there was a machine shop right up along the river or the creek. I think this is a larger picture, so it's taken a while. And again, you can get all these right from the website. I'm going to click past that because it's not loading. Oh, there it is. This is just a later picture of that area where it's no longer there. This is the machine shop that I was mentioning. And this is Lindy Air. So we're looking down heading toward Ramsey Road, Monroeville. And then I'll mention this picture. This is I need to make this bigger, but there was a coal tipple over there. And as you go up 7th Street, this is the Blackburn Farm. So where these people are standing is about where Bella Woods is today. And right up at the top of the hill on the left, you can see the farm buildings. This would have all been Blackburn. Steve, you mentioned one of the houses is possibly, which we haven't figured out up here, that is possibly one of the oldest as well.
Maybe Millivax's house, maybe.
I thought I had.
Yeah, maybe Millivax.
And I'll mention this is over off of this one back here. This is the old brickyard. I mention this because this is where my dad's father first moved to Trafford. These two little houses, hard to believe, between the creek and the tracks, there's a little small patch that was a boarding house run by the Bucars, and anybody who worked at the brickyard would live in, well, not everyone, but some people would live in that boarding house. That's where my grandfather lived. And this is what an old picture from across, again, I just colorized it, but looking across the creek, what they would have seen, some of the original kiln to dry the brick. And when I colorized it, I never spotted this before, but a frame building up at the top of the picture I had never seen before. All right, so that takes up essentially how we got up with some of the existing pre-Trafford 1904 houses. And let's see if there's anyone else. Oh, I knew what I wanted to ask. Again, looking into this, some of the people here may know. I'm going to go back to Blackburn. So we know that this is Moffett. Don Lynn, when he wrote a lot of the 75th anniversary book, he had a lot of notes that his son gave to me. And in these notes, he talks about when he was writing his history, what to include. And he said there was a woolen mill at the Blackburn. It was located just about where Mr. Campbell, the gas man, lives. Does anybody remember Mr. Campbell, the gas man? Maybe that's the best clue I have. But apparently somewhere in this area, it says he remembers the ruins of it, but doesn't remember anything about it. But he believes it was owned by a man named Moffett, which would have been possibly that Moffett in the Blackburn area.
It's a mill, it's gonna be by the creek.
Right, and he said there were still remnants of it in the notes. But I've been up and down that creek 1,000 times too. I don't remember seeing anything as far as a foundation. There was one other one he mentioned. Yeah, here it is. He said Tom Stewart had a stone quarry and a sand mill out near what is now Blackburn, and almost 100 years ago was a woolen mill, something furnished out near Blackburn, near the old Moffett home, which was later remodeled by Mr. Sept, which was the gentleman who took who did the tennis club. So somewhere in that area, and I had never heard of another mill.
She walks the trail
Yes,
and you saw remnants of.
right along the creek. Oh, the brickyard, yes. Yeah, there's definitely remnants of the brickyard. This one, the mill, was supposed to be near the Blackburn, and that's why I was.
Yeah, there's a house. There's still some remnants of the house, and you're walking up the trail.
Okay.
Before you get to the brickyard, there's an old house that's over by Meadow, but not exactly. It's somewhere in between. There.
So here's Meadow.
Yeah, but it's actually closer to the creek there.
So right over here.
The houses are off of Brickyard Road.
Yeah, yeah.
There's 3 of them out there. They're
Yeah, yeah.
pretty bad.
Oh yeah.
That's
Where
where,
Charlie Kunkel used to live.
Uncle lived back there.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's probably it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there was just
It's also there.
again something interesting that with some of these older maps they don't list any of the they don't really describe this area well enough. But I mentioned that. I added these Miller photos. I want to show one. This is where we're talking about there. If there was a mill, I would have thought it would have been showing up in this picture here. But this was a 1902. This is the bridge that crosses the Turtle Creek. This building is gone. This would have been all farmland up here. There you can see some farm buildings, but I don't see any mill there. And I want to mention, this is just an early picture of the BY taken by, I colorized it, but taken by Franklin about 1902. Again, So you'll have access to these. And getting back to how we counted them, this is probably the easiest one to count. These are the original Westinghouse homes. And you see when I click on the Westinghouse, the ones that are in blue are still there. The ones that are in red have been raised or gone. My goal is if anybody has photos of these to try to add them. It doesn't matter the era too. If it's an older picture, if you click on the picture, so that's the street. I think that we're in Fairmont, I believe, and just trying to get some of the photos. This is on Fairmont. And where the church parking lot is now, I just put a map that shows there were on Gilmore. These houses are gone. This house is gone. This house, I think, is gone. No, I'm sorry, the one on the end. Yeah. If I do buildings that are gone, there are a couple houses over here that those properties are gone. So that's how we counted, looking at this old map. Looking at that old map and saying, all right, this is I think this is 1910.
So what was the newest of the 250?
Newest, that's a good question. We got, on our maps, we got up to 1915 and we hit 267 houses or buildings. I added this one just because it was fun. This is the 6th Street Shanty, the Master Annie Shanty. I threw that in there even though I put a little story about it there. That's why I didn't include a lot of smaller things like we came across outbuildings, little detached garages. If it was on the property, that's how we came up with it. So
You don't have outhouses.
yeah, that would be.
Cuts it in half right there.
So this is the oldest map, 1903, and these are the ones that are still. You can see the red. Let me turn off the one right here. So this is Trafford, 1903. If it's in red, it's gone. So most likely those were frame houses that were initially built in 1903. The ones that are green are still there. This is 601 Brinton. I think that's the only one I have a picture of. Let me get into 1909. By the way, let me show you just so that you see what that looks like. 1903, this was an easy map to do. Everything was laid out, but there was next to no buildings. Very few buildings.
What's the date on this?
1903. Where we are sitting right now is right here, and this was the original Brinton house.
Westinghouse buy up all the property? About the farms?
It was the East Pittsburgh Improvement Company.
When?
Bought 1902. Bought the Brinton Farm, Stewart's.
Okay.
Who else am I
Laid
missing?
it out
Yes.
within a year.
Which brings up a good point, Randy. If you're looking at this map, and you showed me this before, so we're looking at Trafford. There is a key on the Westmoreland, and it says patent lines. If you click on that, let's let it load. You'll see the John Ural. You will see Let me see one I can read. Let me turn off the.
Hide the.
Yeah. You'll see John Stewart, John Capet. So, tell me the difference between patent and warrant. You told me this before.
A warrant is you claim it, patent you paid to have it surveyed.
Okay.
So you warrant it and then you patent it later.
Another John Capet. And when we go back over to the Blackburn area, you can see Bouquet's Road. So that Bouquet's Road would have been coming from Bushy Run on their way to Pittsburgh. And they would have passed through this area.
That says Daventi.
Yes.
So whoever that was probably from England, Ireland, or Scotland. 'Cause they named their properties. Like they named their houses still.
I didn't realize that. Venti. And it says on both sides of the road, 2 Fort Pitt.
Yeah. So, like the property that all our Backwell bought in Ardera, which is
Right.
where Granby School is, that was called Chatham.
Got it.
So they named their estates.
All right. So I just wanted to mention that because I thought that was a nice feature on that map. Let me get to 1910, 1909. Again, I'm not going to go through all these. I want to just point out a couple. So these are now 1910, 1909, 1910, 1915, just going through the towns and seeing what was still there. If I click on buildings that are gone, you can see the purple. Which ones are gone? Let me point out a building, let's see. This one was, I had that on the postcard. This is the Oddfellows building, still there. The one photo that I had here, it doesn't have that, and I'm not sure if that was later, but where they just didn't put it on there. I can't believe that they would put the brickwork back in to add IOOF, but this one doesn't show it on there. I want to mention there's a building my dad bought. Wait, you remember what year that was? It was on Capet. Let's see if it's. Oh yeah. No, that's not it. That's Dom's. I don't think it was old enough. I have to look at the map. If I go to it didn't make the it wasn't one of the oldest 250, but it's an interesting This is 1925. That's not the one. I'm looking for Capet. That's Fairmont. Here we go. Keeps jumping off that. I'm not finding what I'm looking for.
Are you looking for the building that was located The next street up was moved down?
Yeah, it was on the back of the,
Main Avenue?
yeah, I'm trying to,
You came down,
let me see if it's on this 15. No. I should have had it already loaded. It's got to be on. I want. Tell me if you see Cabot. All right, here it is. That's the post office. That's 3rd Street. No, I'm not finding it. What was the address? Right,
416 Cabot Avenue.
416.
Right across the street from the post office.
So I'm going the wrong way then. 416.
No, the new post office. Yeah.
I went too far then. No, I'm not finding it. All right, I'm not gonna waste my time on that. All right, the one couple property I did want to mention on Duquesne, buildings that are not there. This is where the Fikes live, and I was talking to Jim once. We told him what we were working on, and he asked me if I knew about the church in his backyard, and I knew this picture, but what I didn't know is the steps were so low. Now these are frame steps, but right behind Jim's house, and I have a little story here. It was initially the Episcopal Church in 1907, and then they built a new church down the road, and then the Baptist Church moved in, and so these steps are in Jim's Fike's backyard, and this is on Duquesne. And if you're in insurance, you'll like this. And this is kind of funny to me because I'm in insurance. But when the Fikes bought this place, and the insurance guy took a picture of the backyard, these steps, they told him to put a handrail on the steps. So the handrail to nowhere, you know. It's an underwriter.
Is that accessed from Edgewood, though, that church?
It was accessed from Duquesne.
From Duquesne?
Yeah, so there was a long walkway. You can see this is an aerial view of where those steps are, and they would have walked up basically planks.
This is where Duquesne goes up the hill.
Right. Yeah. So this is. Let me see.
Mr. Stanley's on there.
Let me go back to here. So here's on the corner of Duquesne and 2nd. This is where the church was. Let me see if there's one other.
Right almost going across from where it was come this way a little bit. You walk through that property.
So this is where we are right now, the Borough Building. I had mentioned earlier this is the Brinton House. So this house was, I put the 416, 414 lot numbers. I shrunk it down onto this map so you can see where the property at least somewhat lines up. So we're sitting probably in the living room maybe of the Brinton House. about so. This is 420 Brinton. I think this was the Rutherford building built in 1903. This is a pretty prominent house in a lot of the pictures, older pictures of Trafford. So there really isn't anything on this block that has survived since everything is new on this, pretty much new on this block. One of my favorites, and Steve, you mentioned the high voltage lab. Let's see. Oh, this is the train station. Right on the corner. I have an article if you haven't seen it, but this is the high voltage laboratory for Westinghouse that's set up on the hill. And Steve mentioned something about this recently. But there's a link here. Again, a nice feature of the of this program is we can put a link to any property. And it takes you to a YouTube video that I did about that high voltage lab. And everybody knows the foundry. You can go crazy adding photos to this, but all right, so that was about an hour's worth of me boring you with my little tasks. But I wanted to basically tell you, if you have photos that you want to add here, your stories, the important part is writing it down or saving these things, because you may not think it's important, but somebody else a generation down, generation, 2 generations removed, may find it important as part of our history. Not everything is online like a lot of people think. There's so much history that is in archives sitting, just donated by families that they don't want to throw it out. They give it to a local historical society like us, and we try to save it. So again, not all this stuff is online. It's fun to put some of this stuff online to get the interest going, particularly with young people. I know when I was 11 or 12 is when we had the 75th anniversary. And when Don Lloyd put that book out, I was fascinated, because I was walking and looking at pictures of things that I always wondered what was there at one time. And you could now, looking at a picture, particularly the, I'll go over to the, I used to play up here. And when I saw this picture with the wall in the tennis courts, I just couldn't imagine being that there was tennis being played up here, because it was all just grass, and those are clay courts. So it may spark an interest in someone. If you might think it's not of any interest to us, but never hurts to ask. Particularly family photos, when you look at buildings or people, and there's buildings in the background. I had a family just moved out of Trafford, and they called me and asked me, they said, nobody in our family wants these photos. Do you want them? What do you think I said? So I have, and I still have to sort them and name them, and I had to take some of they were really moldy or musty. I had to take a cardboard apart on this one photo. You know how they used to frame wedding photos? Nothing was marked on this, and this thing was really smelled. So I tore it apart, and here the photographer put the wedding invitation in the back of the photo. So now I have, let's see, I have the wedding picture, and then I have the family. So I haven't even looked to see it. If I can find the family, they'll get this back. Somebody who wants it. I did find one photo, and I contacted the gentleman on Facebook. I said, I have your grandfather's photo from World War I, and he was severely wounded. And actually, my grandfather, my dad's dad, was in the same battle, and my grandfather was essentially supporting his unit moving forward. And so I know the story about this gentleman, and I was so excited to tell him, I have your grandfather's photo. He didn't care. And I was like, are you kidding me? I felt bad, but guess what? It's gonna end up down at the 80th Division has a museum down in in Richmond, Virginia. They will appreciate it because he was in the 80th Division. So again, that's everyone has their own interest. And
Hey, Andrew.
yes,
My sister's watching on Facebook,
yes,
and going back to Blackburn, and someone mentioned Millivat's house.
oh yes,
So my sister reached out to Mark and asking him about it. And he said that it was his on his mother's side. I guess who actually owned the house originally. And just reading what you wrote here. Yeah, I believe this was built over 140 years ago. But we checked with, I guess it was his mother. My grandfather owned it as he did a lot of land in Trafford. He also owned the BY, and I haven't heard about this. And he gave it to the borough as a gift.
oh wow,
So,
the BY would have been, yeah. So this, I think, Steve, this of Millivat's right here. I marked it as to be determined. I think it's 143 7th Street extension. I have it Millivat, so it was one of the things I'm not going to.
so it came from his mother's side.
Okay.
I don't know what her maiden name
That'd be next to Zaravica.
Okay. Oh, Zaravica's, yeah,
Big lights.
yeah.
As everybody knew.
Any questions on anything that I kind of brushed over because sometimes I talk too fast.
Is Fundustown part of Trafford?
It's actually part of North Huntington. Initially it was part of the North Huntington. Trafford was North Huntington Township. So there was a school at the end of Fundustown. So a lot of in that area, once they put the dividing line for Trafford, to my knowledge, right, if I go back to that one map, right here. You can see the line here for Trafford. Let me turn that off. See Fundustown Road right here?
Yeah.
Even parts of Capetsville, all these students would go to Norwin, and they have a Trafford address, but it's part of North Huntington Township. So however they drew the line out. Any other questions that?
So of the 200 and some houses that you said are the oldest, if you collectively took the ones that Westinghouse built and classified them as one big group, how many do you have before 1904? And you said you went up to 1915, is that what it was?
Yeah, so I guess the easiest way to answer that is for me to start eliminating these check marks. So when I click on just pre-Trafford, I think if we don't count the Millivets, there's that you mean the ones that are still here?
Yes.
Yeah. There's just a handful of the pre-Westinghouse, and then once you get into Westinghouse,
So how many did the Westinghouse build? You had some in red that were gone now.
yeah. So here's I have here 56. So it says 60 houses minus 3 of the Westinghouse, the ones that Westinghouse initially built. So if that answers the question.
Are they all in Fairmont and Gilmore? Like mostly?
Yeah. Someone asked me this and I couldn't answer it.
Did Westinghouse build those, or the improvement company build those?
East Pittsburgh.
No,
Yeah.
So they built them, that was separate from the grand lot sale.
No,
Or you
that
bought-
was
you
part.
bought one, you had built, you had that one together.
Yeah. And the construction company was the Stewart, but I don't know if it was the same Stewarts from Stewartsville or Stewart Station. Could have been a relation, but it was the Stewart company that was the carpenters in construction. Yeah. Oh, I know what it was. None of the alleys were named, which someone asked me when we were at the festival. Why didn't they name the alleys? Because nowadays, and I just couldn't answer that. Let me see if there's anything else.
So the one I grew up in was one of the original Westinghouse houses, 426 Fairmont.
426 Fairmont should be. Let me see.
We grew up in 428
Yeah,
Gilmore.
yeah, Gilmore used to be one of the
426 Fairmont, right there. You have a photo of it, John?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
Can I get you the photo?
Yeah. This was one that the Lloyds shared of.
I don't know what number that was.
That was 427, right across the street from you.
Oh, okay, where was that?
428 Gilmore.
428 Gilmore. Oops. 428 Gilmore, right there. I'll mention one other one. Where's the?
There's not all photos of all, right?
No, I mean,
Old
the
photos.
nice. I mean, I guess right. The nice thing is some of these, you can use Google. You can use Google Maps and Street View to see some of them. I'm more interested to see what they look like, back, and that's what that it would take a while to add every photo. But if there's something unique you want to add, sure enough, I'll do that. One of the things I'd like to do is if love to get a student, and you recall on the back of the 75th anniversary book, Don Lloyd, he painstakingly put every business address and every year that the business owner had changed, and he did that up until 1979. So it's a great resource for. I'd love to add that data. It would just take a while to do that. All right, that's all I got. Let me see if I can. Yes, sir.
If these are, as you call it, Westinghouse houses, then who is responsible for Duquesne and Edgewood?
The streets itself. Well, the East Pittsburgh Improvement Company, they would sell you a lot, and then you would essentially build. So initially, Westinghouse, thinking a company town, they were going to start with housing some of their key people to get the operation running, which was the foundry itself. And then they made sure to include a place for I'm not sure which clergy was designated a house. But is that the question as far as once they have the company houses, the rest of the lots?
Well, yeah, like I said, you have these listed as Westinghouse houses. I assume that the other streets, Capet and Duquesne and the
They were all
AB.
laid out. They were all laid out by the same organization. They bought all the land, laid out the lots, and started selling the chunks.
So
The land rush was for the.
Fairmont, Gilmore.
yeah, so you could, and what's to your point, in between all these company houses, and it would have been after 1915. You'll see houses that show up here, right in between, that are not company houses. They would have been sold. That property would have been sold, even by the East Pittsburgh Improvement Company.
When they laid it out, like
Yes.
Gilmore and Fairmont, basically up to 4th Street there, I guess. They put a lot in between each house. So there was a lot in between each house.
Right.
And then the corner lots, they kept vacant. And that's why you notice the corner lots up there have a variety of, different homes on them, basically. And so if you would go up there and like drive down Gilmore or drive down Fairmont, every other house was pretty much the same. Some of them had a dormer on it, and then some were like what you showed previously there. And then they started selling off in between. And then that's why the ones in between are a little different.
Makes sense. Thanks, Steve.
I don't think they left them wide enough because in between my old house that I lived in, I can almost touch both houses. On either side. It's like 7'4" and 7'5".
See, in the original lot,
In between the house.
Okay, sorry.
When did they start developing 7th Street?
7th Street.
Mrs. Murray's dad, she lived on that house, a real big house, and it was right next to Dobrnik's. And there's like Dobrnik's, and then there's that empty field, and then the one that's back. That's one of the oldest houses. Because I think Mrs. Murray said she grew up there.
Let me find that. So
We
we're
found a pay stub in the rafters of our house, and it was dated 1922.
so it's a good like here's on 7th Street. Some of these I don't. Again, I've only gotten to 1915, so these pins only represent up to that point. So we could continue if you wanted to. It gets a little bit more difficult because there was again, my grandfather, when he got back from the war, he was living on 7th Street. His veteran's card gives the address on 7th Street, and I tried to find that house and it's gone because it was probably a frame house and it was removed.
How
And
are you finding out when they actually put the house? Because the deeds only tell the lot. And when someone sells it, magically a house appeared between the time they bought the lot and they sold it with the house on it. How are you putting the houses?
you mean as far as dating the house?
Yeah.
On here, it's easy to be assuming that these maps are right?
Okay, so the
Yeah.
map has the house, so therefore.
Yeah, so
Okay.
so let's look at.
Magically appeared between 1914 and 1915 because it wasn't on the 14 map, it was on the 15 map.
Yeah, so just as an example, what's this? Yeah, so this is the depot, the Stewart Station. This was the, what do you call the, I have this on the map. What's no longer here, across from the depot. The cash dollar. So the subway, this house is gone. This is the cash dollar store. This house is up, one of the Dr. Stewart's house is gone up on the hill. So Randy, the only way I would know it was looking at the map.
It's only appeared on one map that wasn't on the previous map.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So between.
All the row houses that are, you know, on 6th Street.
Yeah, that had to have been after 15 because they don't show. They might show up in 1925. Let's see if. No, it doesn't even show on this map. They don't show this. This is 1925, and it goes over to the factory, but it doesn't go that far over. It might be on a different map. Any other? Well, I appreciate everyone coming. And again, if you can, no, thanks.